Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back in time, way back, to a medieval monastery. Imagine it, the biting chill of pre-dawn air seeping through thin robes, the rhythmic clang of a distant bell echoing through ancient stone corridors, the faintest scent of damp earth. You're there, huddled in the dim light, ready to begin a day that starts long before the sun even thinks about rising. And trust me, if you were actually there, you'd probably be counting down the minutes until you could get back to your nice, warm bed. Survival. A definite maybe. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're a monk, sometime in the 12th century. The world outside your monastery walls is a cacophony of mud, misery, and occasional mayhem. But here, within the cloister, there's a different kind of existence. It's an ordered life, a life dictated by the chiming of bells, the turning of seasons, and the ancient rhythms of prayer and work. And part of that work, a surprisingly significant part, revolves around herbs and healing. Your day begins, as most monastic days do, with a jarring wake-up call in the middle of the night. The bell, thick and resonant, tolls for matins, the first service of the day. You're groggy, the remnants of dreams clinging to your mind like morning mist. The stone floor beneath your bare feet is unforgivingly cold, a sharp contrast to the rough wool of your sleeping habit. You pull your cowl further over your head, a futile attempt to ward off the chill that seems to permeate every stone, every breath in this ancient building. As you shuffle along with your brothers, a ghostly procession in the flickering lamplight, you might catch the faint earthy scent of damp soil from the nearby cloister garden, even in the depths of winter. It's a subtle reminder of the life that thrives even when the world feels dormant. A life that these monks, in their own quiet way, were intimately connected to. The services are long, punctuated by periods of kneeling, standing, and chanting Latin verses that have been passed down for centuries. Your stomach rumbles, a gentle protest against the ascetic discipline, but you ignore it, focusing instead on the monotonous drone of the prayers, allowing the repetition to lull you into a state of semi-awareness. It's a kind of meditative state, perfect for drifting off. Not that you would, of course. That would be frowned upon heavily after matins and lauds. As the first gray light of dawn begins to paint the eastern sky, comes the chapter meeting. Here, you gather with your brothers. Listen to a reading from the monastic rule, perhaps Saint Benedict's, and receive your duties for the day. Today, it might be something mundane, like repairing a leaky roof on one of the outbuildings, or perhaps tending to the sheep that graze in the monastery's fields. But for many monks, a significant portion of their daily tasks would involve the infirmary and the herb garden. You see, monasteries weren't just spiritual centers. They were also vital hubs of learning, charity, and surprisingly, medicine. In an age when formal medical training was scarce and often unreliable, the monastic infirmary and the monk who tended it was often the primary source of care for both the brothers within the walls and often the weary villagers from outside. This wasn't sophisticated surgery, mind you. You wouldn't find anyone performing complex procedures with sterile instruments. No, this was largely about comfort, care, and the incredible, often overlooked, power of plants. Imagine yourself now, not in the chapel, but in the infirmary garden, as the sun finally crests the horizon, casting long ethereal shadows across neat rows of greenery. The air, though still cool, carries the faint, mingled scents of mint, lavender, and chamomile. You're stooping low, your hands, surprisingly nimble for a man of God, gently plucking leaves or carefully snipping stems. This isn't just gardening for leisure. It's a profound act of care, a connection to the natural world that directly impacts the well-being of your community. Every monastery worth its salt had an herb garden, or herbularis, sometimes even several, each dedicated to specific categories of plants: culinary herbs for the kitchen, aromatic herbs for scenting linens or creating incense, and most importantly, medicinal herbs. These gardens were meticulously planned, often laid out in geometric patterns, with raised beds that made tending easier and protected the precious plants from errant feet or hungry animals. Historians still argue whether the precise layouts of these gardens were purely practical or held deeper symbolic meaning, perhaps reflecting the ordered universe of God's creation. The monk responsible for the infirmary and the herb garden was known as the infirmarian. This wasn't a role for just anyone. It required patience, a keen eye for detail, and a remarkable memory. Why a memory? Because back then, there were no handy apps or online databases. The infirmarian carried an entire encyclopedia of botanical knowledge in his head: which herb treated which ailment, when to harvest each plant for maximum potency, and how to prepare it, whether as a poultice, an ointment, or, of course, a soothing tea. Consider the sheer breadth of knowledge required. You'd need to differentiate between dozens of varieties of mint, understanding that peppermint might settle a queasy stomach, while spearmint could ease a headache. You'd know that valerian root, with its rather earthy smell, was a powerful sedative, perfect for those suffering from restlessness or insomnia, common complaint even in the medieval period, often exacerbated by the harsh monastic life. And chamomile, with its delicate white flowers, was a gentle anti-inflammatory, good for both upset stomachs and irritated skin. It's easy to romanticize, but the reality was a lot of trial and error, observation, and painstaking record-keeping. This knowledge wasn't just intuitive, it was accumulated over centuries. Monasteries were, in many ways, the custodians of ancient wisdom. When the Roman Empire fell, much of the classical knowledge of medicine, agriculture, and philosophy was lost to the wider world. But within the quiet, hallowed walls of abbeys and priories, scribes painstakingly copied manuscripts, sometimes in freezing scriptoriums, preserving the texts of Greek and Roman physicians like Galen and Hippocrates. These ancient texts, often filled with descriptions of plants and their uses, formed the bedrock of monastic medical practice. So, while you might be digging in the dirt, you were also, in a way, connecting to a legacy of scholarship that stretched back to antiquity. It's kind of wild to think about, isn't it? That the guy weeding the monastery garden might have been carrying around more medical knowledge than most of the nobility outside the walls. The infirmarian's duties weren't limited to the garden. He was also responsible for preparing the medicines. This involved grinding dried herbs with a pestle and mortar, mixing them with honey or wine to create palatable concoctions, or simmering them gently in water to make infusions, a fancy word for tea. Imagine the sounds in the infirmary at dusk, the gentle thump-thump of the pestle, the soft gurgle of a pot simmering over a low fire, the occasional sigh of a patient trying to find comfort. It wasn't a sterile, gleaming hospital, but a quiet, often dim room, filled with the aroma of drying herbs and the quiet murmurs of prayer. The focus, as we'll explore more deeply, was often on comfort and support rather than aggressive cures. Many medieval ailments were, frankly, untreatable by any means available at the time, but a warm herbal tea could soothe a cough, ease a fever, or simply provide a moment of peace to someone in pain. This gentle, holistic approach, so different from modern medicine, was the heart of monastic healing. It was about tending to the body as part of God's creation and providing solace for the soul. As the first rays of sunlight truly illuminated the monastic grounds, painting the ducust leaves of the herb garden in shimmering gold, your focus would shift entirely from the hushed solemnity of prayer to the quiet, vital work of cultivation. You'd probably hear the gentle hum of bees already busy among the lavender and borage, a comforting backdrop to your morning chores. It's a stark contrast, isn't it? From chanting ancient hymns in a cold chapel to carefully tending a patch of dirt. But for the medieval monk, both were equally sacred, equally part of God's work. You're not just a gardener. You're a living library of botanical knowledge. Each plant isn't merely a green shoot in the earth. It's a potential remedy, a source of comfort, a tiny miracle waiting to be harvested. You'd know, for instance, that the unassuming plantain, often dismissed as a common weed, was a powerful wound healer, its crushed leaves applied directly to cuts and scrapes, or that mullein, with its tall, fuzzy stalks, could be steeped to create a soothing cough syrup, a godsend during the damp, cold medieval winters when respiratory ailments were rampant. It's all about observation, really. Generations of monks, before you had watched, experimented, and passed down this intricate wisdom. The design of these gardens was often quite practical, allowing for efficient cultivation and harvesting. You might find different sections: the hortus, for vegetables and fruits, the herbularius, specifically for medicinal herbs, and perhaps even a physic garden where more exotic or specialized plants, often brought back from distant lands by crusaders or pilgrims, were carefully nurtured. Imagine the mild excitement when a new, unfamiliar seed arrived, perhaps from the Holy Land, promising new possibilities for healing. That would be like Christmas morning for a medieval infirmarian, though, probably without the gifts. Unless a new variety of licorice root counts, which it absolutely would. Your tools would be simple: a small spade, a hoe, a digging stick. No fancy machinery here, just manual labor and a deep connection to the earth. You'd spend hours on your knees, meticulously weeding, loosening the soil, and perhaps setting out small, hand-carved markers to identify each plant. This isn't just about making the garden look nice. It's about ensuring the purity of your medicinal stock. You wouldn't want to accidentally mix up foxglove, a powerful heart stimulant that could also be deadly in the wrong dose, with something harmless. A modern-day pharmacist's nightmare, perhaps, but a daily reality for the medieval monk. One of the more fascinating aspects of these monastic gardens was their role in preserving biodiversity. In a world without global seed banks or botanical gardens as we know them, monasteries acted as living repositories for countless plant species. They exchanged seeds and cuttings with other monasteries, often across vast distances, effectively creating a network of botanical knowledge transfer. This cross-pollination, if you'll pardon the pun, meant that a plant common in, say, an Italian monastery might eventually find its way to a remote abbey in England, adapting and flourishing in its new environment. Historians still debate the exact extent of this seed exchange, but the evidence suggests it was far more extensive and organized than previously imagined. Beyond the purely medicinal, these gardens were also places of quiet contemplation. As you worked, you might recite prayers or contemplate passages from Scripture. The rhythmic nature of weeding, planting, and harvesting lent itself to a meditative state. It was a physical manifestation of their spiritual devotion, a tangible way to care for God's creation and, by extension, God's people. The act of nurturing life from a tiny seed to a potent remedy was seen as a virtuous pursuit, a quiet service to both humanity and the divine now. Let's talk about the specific plants you'd be tending for their soothing qualities, the ones destined to become those secret herbal teas. Imagine reaching for the delicate flowers of chamomile, known even then for its gentle, calming effects. You'd carefully pluck the blossoms, knowing they'd be dried and later steeped to help someone restless with worry or suffering from an upset stomach. It's a classic for a reason, isn't it? Even today, a good cup of chamomile tea is often the go-to for a bit of evening relaxation. Then there's lemon balm, a member of the mint family with its bright, citrusy scent. You'd crush a leaf between your fingers, inhaling its refreshing aroma. This herb was cherished for its ability to uplift spirits and soothe anxiety, often brewed as a tea for those feeling melancholic or overwhelmed. It was believed to bring joy and ward off heavy thoughts, a medieval way of describing what we might now call mild depression. Think of it as a natural antidepressant, long before such terms even existed. And of course, the mighty valerian. This plant, with its clusters of small, often pinkish-white flowers, looks quite unassuming, but its roots contain compounds that have a powerful sedative effect. Harvesting valerian root was a particular skill, as the roots are most potent in autumn. You'd carefully dig them up, wash them, and then dry them in a cool, dark place. The smell, I must warn you, is ... unique. Some describe it as cheesy, others as earthy. But its efficacy for promoting sleep and calming nerves was undeniable, making it an invaluable part of the monastic apothecary. It's not exactly a relaxing aroma, but it gets the job done. You might also cultivate lavender, not just for its beautiful purple flowers and delightful scent, but for its calming properties. A tea made from lavender flowers could help ease headaches and promote a sense of tranquility. And passion flower, with its incredibly intricate and beautiful blossoms, was used to treat insomnia and nervous restlessness. It's a plant that almost seems designed to calm you just by looking at it, isn't it? Like something out of a fairy tale, but with serious medicinal power. The process of preparing these herbs for storage was crucial. After harvesting, the plants would be carefully cleaned, sometimes gently rinsed to remove any soil. Then came the drying process. Herbs would be hung in bundles in cool, airy, dark places. like an attic or a dedicated drying room, to prevent mildew and preserve their potency. You'd check them regularly, ensuring they dried evenly, not too quickly, which could strip them of their volatile oils, and not too slowly, which could lead to rot. Imagine a room filled with dozens of hanging bundles, each exhaling its unique aroma, a natural, earthy perfume that would slowly infuse the very air of the monastery. This careful storage was essential because these herbs were not just for immediate use. They were gathered and prepared to last through the harsh winter months when fresh plants were scarce. It was a form of medieval food preservation, but for medicine. You were building up a larder of healing, ensuring that even in the bleakest depths of January, a soothing chamomile tea or a potent valerian infusion would be available for those in need. The meticulousness required in the garden extended to the scriptorium, where knowledge about these plants was meticulously recorded. You see, the monks weren't just practicing medicine, they were also documenting it. The act of copying ancient texts, often richly illustrated with detailed drawings of plants, was a central pillar of monastic scholarship. These illuminated manuscripts, known as herbals, were far more than just pretty pictures. They were practical guides containing descriptions of plants, their habitats, their medicinal properties, and instructions for their preparation and use. Imagine the painstaking work involved, sitting for hours, hunched over a vellum page, with only the flickering light of a candle or a window to illuminate your work. Your hand, guided by years of practice, would meticulously form each letter, each stroke of the quill you'd be copying, word for word, perhaps a text originally written in Greek centuries ago, then translated into Latin. Sometimes you might even be adding your own observations, based on your practical experience in the garden or infirmary. This was how knowledge was disseminated, slowly and painstakingly, across the monastic network. These herbals were incredibly valuable, not just financially, but intellectually. They were the textbooks, the encyclopedias, and the diagnostic manuals of the medieval world. A well-stocked monastic library would boast several such volumes, each offering a slightly different perspective or containing knowledge of different regional plants. Historians still argue whether these herbals were primarily for practical use by the infirmarian, or if they served a more symbolic or even spiritual purpose, reflecting the beauty and order of God's creation through detailed botanical illustration. It's likely a bit of both, isn't it? A practical guide that also inspired reverence, so, as you work in the peaceful quiet of the monastic garden, or later, transcribe the wisdom of ages in the scriptorium. You're not just a simple monk, you are a healer, a botanist, a scribe, and a preserver of knowledge. You are a vital link in a chain of care that stretched back through antiquity and would continue in various forms for centuries to come. And all of it, ultimately, was aimed at providing comfort and solace in a world that often offered precious little of either. The gentle hum of the bees, the rustle of leaves, the quiet scratching of a quill on parchment, these were the sounds of medieval healing, slowly, meticulously, unfolding within the monastery walls. With the sun now fully risen, casting long shadows across the cloister and painting the herb garden in a softer, warmer light, your attention would turn from cultivation to collation. You've gathered your fresh herbs, their vibrant colors and distinct aromas filling the air. Now, the next crucial step in this quiet monastic ballet of healing transforming those living plants into the very essence of comfort. Those soothing herbal teas and other gentle remedies. You'd make your way from the Dukist garden to the more enclosed, almost secret space of the monastic infirmary, or perhaps a small, dedicated apothecary. This wouldn't be a grand, sterile room like a modern hospital pharmacy. Instead, picture a simple, functional space, probably quite small, with sturdy wooden tables, shelves lined with earthenware pots, and glass phials, if they were lucky enough to have glass, and perhaps a single, small fireplace for simmering concoctions. The air here would be thick with the mingled scents of dried herbs, beeswax, and perhaps a faint, lingering aroma of something earthy and medicinal. It's a quiet alchemy, performed with reverence and meticulous care. On your workbench, you'd lay out your tools, a heavy stone mortar and pestle for grinding dried roots and leaves into fine powders, sharp knives for chopping fresh herbs, and various sieves and cloths for straining infusions. There might be a small balance scale, incredibly precise for the time, for measuring out precious ingredients. Because even with herbs, too much of a good thing can sometimes be just too much. It's not quite a science lab, but it's certainly a place of methodical precision. Let's focus on those soothing herbal teas, because in a world without painkillers or sophisticated pharmaceuticals, a warm, carefully brewed infusion was often the primary source of relief and comfort for a multitude of ailments. Imagine a monk suffering from a persistent cough, or a villager plagued by sleeplessness, or even a brother experiencing the general malaise that often accompanied medieval life. A cup of specially prepared tea could make all the difference. You'd begin by selecting the right herbs. For someone struggling to sleep, your mind would immediately go to valerian root. You'd take a small, dried piece of the root, its aroma pungent and earthy, and carefully grind it in the mortar. The goal is not just to break it down, but to release its active compounds. Then, you'd add the crushed root to a small pot of simmering water. The key here is simmering, not boiling. Boiling can destroy delicate plant compounds, reducing their efficacy. This gentle heat allows the beneficial constituents to slowly infuse into the water, creating a potent decoction. Historians still argue whether the precise temperature control was entirely accidental, or if monks had an intuitive understanding of the optimal heat for different preparations. Given their meticulous nature, I lean towards intuition honed by centuries of practice. For someone with an upset stomach or general anxiety, you'd reach for the more fragrant and delicate chamomile flowers or lemon balm leaves. These would often be used as an infusion, meaning you'd pour hot, but not boiling, water over the fresh or dried herbs and let them steep for a period, much like making a cup of modern tea. The gentle heat would coax out the volatile oils and beneficial compounds, creating a light aromatic brew. The aroma alone, I imagine, would be half the cure, bringing a sense of calm even before the first sip. You might also blend different herbs to create a more synergistic effect. For example, a tea for a restless patient might combine the sedative power of valerian with the gentle calming of chamomile and the mood-lifting properties of lemon balm. It's like being a medieval mixologist, but instead of fancy cocktails, you're crafting bespoke remedies for weary souls. And no, you wouldn't get a tip unless a silent prayer counts, which, to them, it absolutely would. The preparation wasn't just about the right ingredients, it was about the ritual. Every step, from the careful measurement to the gentle stirring, would be performed with focus and intention. There was a belief, deeply ingrained in medieval thought, that the efficacy of a remedy wasn't just in its chemical compounds, but also in the prayer and intention with which it was prepared. So, as you stirred the simmering pot, you might be whispering a quiet prayer for the patient's healing, imbuing the tea with spiritual as well as botanical power. It's a holistic approach that truly blends faith and practical application. These teas weren't just for sleep or anxiety, they were versatile. A strong infusion of sage was used for sore throats and coughs, acting as an antiseptic and expectorant. Fennel and aniseeds, gently crushed and steeped, were used to aid digestion and relieve bloating. Even the common nettle, often seen as a pesky weed, was valued for its iron content and used in teas to combat general weakness or to act as a mild diuretic. It just goes to show, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and medicinal value is often in the eye of the monk. Think about the process of serving these teas. You wouldn't just hand over a mug, you'd likely bring it to the patient in the infirmary. Perhaps a brother suffering from a lingering fever, or a traveler recovering from a long, arduous journey. You'd offer a few words of comfort, perhaps a blessing, and watch as they slowly, carefully sipped the warm brew. It was a moment of quiet connection, a small act of charity and compassion in a world that could often be harsh and unforgiving. Beyond the teas, the infirmary and its attendant monk were also responsible for preparing other simple remedies, ointments made from comfrey and beeswax for bruised limbs, poultices of plantain for infected wounds, and even simple syrups made with honey and various herbs for coughs and colds. These were the staples of medieval first aid, the go-to solutions for everyday aches and pains. Imagine having to make all your own band-aids. No quick trip to the pharmacy for these guys. One quirky tidbit about monastic medicine is the occasional inclusion of non-plant-based ingredients, sometimes bordering on the truly bizarre by modern standards. While largely plant-focused, some medieval medical texts, even those copied by monks, contained remedies that would make you raise an eyebrow. Think powdered pearls for melancholy, or even dried animal parts for various ailments. While these were less common in the daily preparation of teas, they show the blend of empirical observation and folkloric belief that characterized much of medieval medicine. Historians still argue whether these more esoteric remedies were actually effective, or if their inclusion was more about tradition and the perceived power of rare ingredients. It's a good reminder that even the most dedicated healers were operating within the limits of their knowledge and understanding. The monastic infirmary wasn't just a place for the monks themselves. Often, especially in larger or wealthier abbeys, it would open its doors to the wider community. The poor, the sick, and the weary from nearby villages would seek aid from the skilled infirmarian. This act of charity was central to the monastic mission. Providing care for the sick, regardless of their status, was seen as a direct fulfillment of Christian duty. So, your little apothecary, with its simmering pots and fragrant herbs, wasn't just serving a handful of brothers. It was a beacon of healing for a much larger population. The careful record-keeping in the scriptorium, which we touched on, was vital for this process. Imagine trying to replicate a complex herbal blend without precise instructions. Not fun. The monks painstakingly copied detailed descriptions of plants, their medicinal properties, and precise instructions for preparing remedies. These herbals were their reference books, their encyclopedias of botanical knowledge. They might include beautiful, almost scientific illustrations of plants, allowing for accurate identification, a crucial step when dealing with potentially potent or even toxic species. Consider the dedication involved. Copying a single large herbal could take months, even years, of continuous work. Every stroke of the quill, every carefully mixed pigment for illustrations was an act of profound commitment. And these weren't just for show. They were living documents, constantly referred to, annotated, and even expanded upon by successive generations of infirmarians. It was a slow, painstaking process of knowledge transfer, one illuminated manuscript at a time. It kind of makes you appreciate Google, doesn't it? The monks' approach to healing was holistic. They understood that physical ailments were often intertwined with spiritual and emotional distress. So, alongside the herbal teas, there would be prayer, spiritual counseling, and a quiet, calming atmosphere. The very routine of monastic life, the regular prayers, the structured day, the sense of community, often provided a profound sense of psychological comfort that aided in recovery. It's the original mind-body connection, healthcare, centuries before it became a buzzword. This blending of practical medicine with spiritual care was a hallmark of monastic healing. You weren't just treating a symptom, you were caring for the whole person, and the soothing herbal teas you meticulously prepared were a tangible expression of that care. A warm, fragrant promise of comfort in a world that truly needed it. They were simple, yet profoundly effective. Remedies born from centuries of observation, faith, and the quiet dedication of those who chose a life of service within the monastery walls. Each sip was not just a drink. It was a moment of peace, a whisper of healing carried on the steam of fragrant herbs. As the fragrant steam from your freshly prepared chamomile infusion gently curls upwards, carrying promises of rest to a weary brother in the infirmary, you'd begin to truly appreciate the sheer scale of ailments that plagued medieval society. It wasn't just the obvious, dramatic stuff you see in movies, like plague though, that was certainly a grim reality. No, life back then was a constant negotiation with illness, often brought on by poor sanitation, inadequate nutrition, and a general lack of understanding about how diseases spread. Imagine, for a moment, the common complaints that would land. A patient on a simple straw mattress in your infirmary. You'd see a lot of fevers. Without antibiotics, even a common cold could escalate into something far more serious. A fever was a major concern, draining strength and causing delirium. For this, your herbal arsenal would include things like willow bark, which contains salicin, a precursor to aspirin, offering some relief from pain and fever. You might also administer infusions of elderflower, known for its diaphoretic properties, meaning it would induce sweating to break the fever. It wasn't a cure, but it offered comfort and support to the body's own healing process. Then there were the digestive complaints. Oh, the digestive complaints. A medieval diet, often heavy on coarse grains, preserved meats, and not always fresh, produce was a recipe for stomach aches, bloating, and various forms of internal distress. For these, fennel and anise seeds, gently steeped, would be your go-to. Their carminative properties helped to expel gas and soothe cramps. Mint, in its various forms, was also a powerful ally, settling nauseous stomachs and aiding digestion. You'd often see a patient clutching their stomach, pale and uncomfortable, and a warm cup of mint tea could often provide surprising relief. It sounds so simple, doesn't it? But sometimes, simple is exactly what's needed. Skin conditions were rampant. Medieval life was, shall we say, less than hygienic by modern standards. Cuts, scrapes, boils, and rashes were daily occurrences. For these, you'd rely heavily on external applications. Plantain leaves, crushed and applied as a poultice, were excellent for drawing out infection and aiding wound healing. Comfrey, sometimes called knitbone for its reputed ability to help mend fractures, though its internal use was risky due to liver toxicity. A fact probably not fully understood then, was excellent for bruises and sprains when applied externally. You might mix it with a bit of beeswax to create a soothing salve. Imagine the satisfaction of seeing a raw, red wound slowly begin to heal under your care, all thanks to a common plant. Respiratory issues were another huge category. Damp, cold dwellings, smoky fires, and seasonal changes meant coughs, colds, and bronchitis were constants. Mullein tea, as mentioned, was excellent for soothing coughs. Hyssop and thyme were also used for their expectorant properties, helping to clear congested lungs. You might even prepare an inhalation, steaming hot water infused with these herbs for someone struggling to breathe. It's a bit like a medieval Vicks Vapor-Up, but entirely natural. And let's not forget the ever-present problem of pain. Chronic pain from hard labor, injuries, and conditions like arthritis would have been widespread. While strong painkillers, as we know them, didn't exist, monks still offered what they could. Willow bark for general aches, lavender and chamomile for tension headaches. For more severe pain, they might resort to opium poppy, carefully cultivated and administered. This was a powerful substance, used sparingly and with great caution, highlighting the delicate balance between relief and danger. Historians still argue about the precise dosages and frequency of opium use in monastic settings. It was certainly not the recreational drug we sometimes associated with today, but a serious medicine of last resort. Mental and emotional well-being were also addressed, though perhaps not with the explicit terminology of modern psychology. Melancholy, a pervasive sadness often linked to an imbalance of humors, was a common complaint. For this, lemon balm was highly valued, believed to uplift the spirits and dispel gloom. St. John's wort, another sunny yellow flower, was also used, though its true antidepressant properties wouldn't be fully understood for centuries. The gentle, calming atmosphere of the monastery itself, coupled with the routine and spiritual guidance, played a huge role in supporting mental health. It wasn't just the herbs, it was the whole environment, beyond the common human ailments. There were also the specific challenges of monastic life itself. The rigors of fasting, especially during Lent, could lead to weakness and nutritional deficiencies. The cold, damp stone buildings could exacerbate respiratory problems and joint pain. The constant hours of prayer and manual labor could lead to exhaustion and physical strain. For these, the infirmarian would prepare fortifying broths, herbal infusions, and warming remedies to help the brothers maintain their health and continue their demanding spiritual duties. It was a constant balancing act, isn't it? Trying to maintain health in an environment that, while spiritually enriching, was often physically challenging. One quirky tidbit you might encounter relates to parasitic infections. In a world without modern hygiene, these were incredibly common. While not a soothing tea in the traditional sense, some herbs, like wormwood, yes, the stuff in absinthe, but used differently here, were steeped to create bitter concoctions intended to expel intestinal worms. Imagine trying to get a medieval patient to drink that. Probably not their favorite tea time, but likely necessary. It just goes to show how truly different the daily health challenges were. The relationship between the infirmarian and the sick was deeply personal. Unlike a modern doctor's visit, which can often feel rushed and impersonal, the monastic healer would know his patients intimately. He would have observed their habits, listened to their confessions, and perhaps even prayed alongside them. This holistic understanding of the individual, combined with his botanical knowledge, allowed for a truly individualized approach to healing. It wasn't just about prescribing a generic remedy. It was about understanding the whole person. This personal touch extended to preventive care. As much as that concept existed, monks would be encouraged to consume certain herbal infusions regularly for general well-being, especially during times of seasonal change or when illness was circulating. Think of it as a medieval daily vitamin, but in liquid herbal form. They understood that maintaining health was often easier than trying to regain it once lost. And while much of their knowledge came from ancient texts, there was also a strong element of empirical observation. The infirmarian would constantly be learning from his own experiences, noting what worked and what didn't, adapting remedies based on the patient's response. This hands-on, trial-and-error approach was crucial in an era without formal scientific research. It was slow science, but science nonetheless, built on careful attention and meticulous record-keeping. This brings us to a significant scholarly debate. How effective were these medieval remedies, really? Historians still argue whether the perceived benefits were largely due to the placebo effect, the body's natural healing ability, or the genuine pharmacological action of the herbs. While it's true that many medieval cures were based on superstition, or flawed theories like the humor theory of medicine, the efficacy of many common herbs for minor ailments is supported by modern science. For instance, chamomile for sleep, mint for digestion, and willow bark for pain are still recognized for their properties today. So, while you probably wouldn't want to undergo major surgery in a medieval infirmary, a comforting cup of herbal tea for your upset stomach might just do the trick. It's a fascinating blend of ancient wisdom and surprisingly effective folk remedies, all wrapped up in the quiet dignity of monastic life. The infirmary itself was a place of quiet refuge. Patients would rest in simple beds, often on straw mattresses, with clean linen, a luxury for many outside the walls. The atmosphere would be calm, punctuated by the soft murmurs of prayer and the gentle sounds of the infirmarian at work. It was a place designed to facilitate healing, not just through remedies, but through peace and spiritual solace. Consider the journey of a single, ailing villager seeking aid from the monastery. They would trudge through muddy paths, perhaps for miles, battling the elements, driven by desperation and the reputation of the monks. Upon arrival, they would likely be met with compassion, offered warmth, food, and then the healing touch of a diagnosis based on observation and a few simple questions would lead to the selection of appropriate herbs. Then, the careful preparation, the slow brewing of a tea, perhaps the application of a poultice. It was a tangible expression of faith and charity, a lifeline in a precarious world. So, as you imagine the gentle rhythm of monastic life, remember that amidst the prayers and scholarly pursuits, there was also this deeply practical, intensely caring aspect, the tending of the sick, the cultivation of healing plants, and the meticulous preparation of remedies. These medieval monks, with their humble gardens and simple apothecaries, were not just spiritual guides. They were also the unsung healers of their age, offering comfort and quiet care, one soothing herbal tea at a time. It's a legacy that, perhaps surprisingly, still resonates today in our own search for natural remedies and moments of calm. While you, the medieval infirmarian, were meticulously tending your herb garden and brewing soothing teas, much of your knowledge wasn't born from scratch in your quiet monastery. No, a significant portion, indeed the very foundation of medical practice, was rooted in the wisdom of the ancients, particularly the Greek and Roman physicians. Imagine then the flickering candlelight of the scriptorium casting long, dancing shadows on the vellum pages of an age-old manuscript. This is where centuries of healing knowledge were painstakingly preserved, copied, and often interpreted. The names of Hippocrates and Galen would have been whispered with reverence among educated monks. These weren't just historical figures. They were the titans of medicine, whose writings had shaped medical thought for over 1,000 years. Hippocrates, often called the father of medicine, laid down ethical principles still echoed in the Hippocratic Oath. But more importantly, for your purposes, he championed the idea of observation and rational inquiry. He moved away from purely supernatural explanations for illness, suggesting that diseases had natural causes and that diet, environment, and lifestyle played crucial roles. His theory of the four humors, blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm, though ultimately incorrect, provided a framework for understanding health and disease that dominated Western medicine for centuries. You, as a monastic healer, would interpret a patient's symptoms through this humoral lens. A fever, for instance, might be seen as an excess of blood, requiring methods to cool the patient. A melancholy, as we discussed, might be attributed to an excess of black bile. And while modern science has long moved past the humors, the monks' application of this theory often led to surprisingly beneficial interventions, like encouraging rest, regulating diet, and using specific herbs to balance perceived imbalances. A chamomile tea for an overheated patient could indeed help lower a fever and induce sweating, aligning with the humoral idea of expelling excess heat. Then there's Galen of Pergamon, a Roman physician of Greek descent, who lived centuries after Hippocrates. Galen was arguably even more influential in the medieval period. He was a prolific writer, producing hundreds of treatises on anatomy, physiology, diagnosis, and therapeutics. His work was incredibly systematic and detailed, far beyond anything produced in the West for many centuries after the fall of Rome. Galen performed dissections, mostly on animals, as human dissection was often forbidden, meticulously documenting his findings. While some of his anatomical conclusions were flawed due to this reliance on animal models, his detailed descriptions of body systems and his theories on the pulse and urine examination became standard diagnostic tools for medieval physicians, including monks. You'd be poring over texts like Galen's Methodus Medendi, Method of Curing, or his various works on pharmacology. These weren't light reads. They were dense, complex treatises, often filled with intricate arguments and detailed recipes for concoctions. The monk's dedication to copying these texts was monumental. Imagine, in a world before printing presses, the only way to disseminate this knowledge was by hand. Hour after hour, day after day, a scribe would sit, often in cold, dimly lit conditions, meticulously replicating every word, every diagram. It's the original slow-motion download, isn't it? These ancient texts often contained extensive lists of plants and their medicinal properties, many of which you would recognize from your own herb garden. They described how to prepare infusions, decoctions, poultices, and ointments, often with precise measurements, although medieval measurements could be a bit fluid, shall we say. A handful, or as much as you can hold in 3 fingers, isn't exactly the metric system. Still, the fundamental principles of herbal medicine, the understanding that certain plants possessed specific healing qualities, were directly inherited from these classical sources. One quirky tidbit: sometimes, when copying these ancient texts, scribes would occasionally misinterpret or misread a word, leading to subtle changes in remedies that were then propagated through subsequent copies. It's like a medieval game of telephone, but with potentially life-saving information. This is one reason why, even with a seemingly consistent source like Galen, variations in practice could emerge across different monasteries or regions. Historians still argue how frequently these transcription errors occurred and what their ultimate impact on medieval medical practice truly was. It adds a fascinating layer of complexity to understanding how knowledge evolved. The preservation of these texts was not just about intellectual curiosity, it was about practical necessity. When secular learning institutions largely collapsed in the early Middle Ages, monasteries became the primary centers of scholarship. Without the monks painstakingly copying these classical works, much of this medical knowledge would have been lost to the West entirely during the so-called Dark Ages. It was a cultural lifeline, sustained by quiet dedication and flickering lamplight. Consider the journey of one of these ancient texts. It might have been written in Alexandria in the 2nd century AD, survived the burning of libraries, been copied in Constantinople, then perhaps carried across the Mediterranean by a traveling scholar, eventually finding its way to a Benedictine monastery in rural France. There, a monk, perhaps like you, would dedicate years to creating a new copy, ensuring its survival for another generation. It's an extraordinary lineage, isn't it? A testament to the power of knowledge and the quiet heroes who preserved it beyond Hippocrates and Galen. Monks also studied the works of Roman agricultural writers like Pliny the Elder, whose natural history contained vast amounts of information on plants, animals, and minerals, including their medicinal applications. While not strictly a medical text, it provided a rich compendium of natural knowledge that infirmarians could draw upon. The sheer volume of information they had access to through these carefully copied manuscripts was impressive for the era. This reliance on classical authority meant that monastic medicine was often conservative. Innovation, in the modern sense, was rare. The emphasis was on faithfully reproducing and applying the wisdom of the past, rather than on experimentation or developing entirely new theories. This isn't to say there was no adaptation. As we discussed, monks incorporated local plants and observed their own results, slowly building a body of practical, experiential knowledge that blended with the classical texts. But the classical framework remained dominant. Think about the feeling of holding one of these ancient texts in your hands. The vellum, made from animal skin, smooth and supple. The carefully inked script, sometimes adorned with beautiful illustrations of plants that you recognized from your own garden. It would have been a profound connection to the past, a tangible link to the great minds of antiquity. It wasn't just a book. It was a living embodiment of wisdom, passed down through generations. The curriculum for a monk destined to be an infirmarian would have involved not just practical work in the garden and infirmary, but also extensive study of these medical treatises. They would memorize plant names, understand the humoral theory, learn diagnostic techniques based on pulse and urine, and internalize countless recipes for various ailments. It was a rigorous education, often far surpassing the medical knowledge of many secular practitioners outside the monastery walls. However, it's also important to acknowledge the limitations of this reliance on ancient texts. While they preserved invaluable knowledge, they also perpetuated certain errors or outdated theories. For example, the detailed anatomical descriptions from Galen, based primarily on animal dissections, contained inaccuracies when applied to humans, and the humoral theory, while a useful framework, sometimes led to treatments that were ineffective or even harmful. Historians still argue about the precise degree to which these inaccuracies impacted patient outcomes. But it's clear that medieval medicine, even at its most sophisticated, was operating with an incomplete understanding of human physiology. Despite these limitations, the fact that monastic communities kept this flame of medical knowledge burning through centuries of upheaval is truly remarkable. They were the unsung heroes of intellectual continuity, ensuring that the accumulated wisdom of Greece and Rome wasn't lost entirely to the winds of time. Without their quiet, painstaking work in the scriptorium, poring over those ancient texts, by the light of a flickering candle, the very foundation of Western medicine would have been far more fragile. So, as you prepare another soothing chamomile tea, remember that each sip connects not just to your peaceful monastery garden, but to a vast river of knowledge flowing from ancient Athens and Rome. The simple act of brewing a tea for a medieval monk was a continuation of a scholarly and healing tradition stretching back over a millennium, a testament to the enduring power of knowledge, painstakingly preserved in the quiet, dusty corners of the monastic world. It's a reminder that even the most seemingly mundane tasks can carry profound historical weight, gently passed down, one copied word, one cultivated herb at a time. From the quiet contemplation of ancient texts and the meticulous care of the herb garden, your attention as the monastic infirmarian would shift to the actual, hands-on process of transforming raw plants into the beneficial concoctions. This is where the quiet alchemy of the monastic apothecary truly came alive. It wasn't about flashy experiments or dramatic discoveries. It was about precision, patience, and an almost sacred respect for the natural world's healing bounty. Imagine yourself in the small, dedicated room near the infirmary, your monastic equivalent of a modern pharmacy. The air here is a complex blend of scents: dried lavender from bundles hanging from the rafters, the pungent earthiness of stored valerian root, and perhaps the faint, sweet aroma of honey, a frequent addition to mask bitter tastes. Your workspace is tidy, with well-used wooden mortar and pestles of various sizes, carefully sharpened knives, and a collection of ceramic bowls and clay pots. There are no gleaming chrome surfaces here, just the warm, honest feel of natural materials. Let's walk through the steps of preparing some of those soothing herbal teas and other gentle remedies that formed the cornerstone of your daily practice. First, the collection. We've touched on this, but it bears repeating. Timing was everything. You wouldn't just harvest chamomile flowers whenever. You'd pick them at their peak, usually in the morning after the dew had dried, when their volatile oils were most potent. Valerian root would be dug up in the autumn, when its sedative compounds were at their strongest. This intimate knowledge of plant cycles was passed down through generations, ensuring maximum efficacy for your remedies. It's the original farm-to-pharmacy movement, except without the trendy cafes. Once harvested, the drying process was crucial. You'd carefully clean the herbs, removing any dirt or insects. Then, depending on the plant part, they would be dried. Leaves and flowers might be spread out thinly on woven mats or hung in bunches in a cool, dark, airy place. Roots and barks, being denser, required more time and perhaps a gentler heat, sometimes in a slow oven or near a dying fire. The goal was to remove moisture without cooking the plant, preserving its active constituents. A properly dried herb would retain its color and aroma, a testament to your careful work. Imagine a room filled with dozens of hanging bundles, each exhaling its unique aroma, a natural, earthy perfume that would slowly infuse the very air of the monastery. Now, for the preparation. For a simple infusion, what we commonly call tea, you'd take your dried herbs, perhaps a handful of chamomile flowers, or a few sprigs of lemon balm. You'd place them in a clay pot and then pour over water that had been brought to just below boiling. Boiling water can destroy delicate compounds, so a gentle simmering or pouring just off the boil water was key. The pot would then be covered, allowing the beneficial volatile oils to be trapped and infuse into the water. After 5 to 10 minutes, depending on the desired strength, the liquid would be strained through a fine cloth or sieve, leaving you with a clear, fragrant, and wonderfully soothing tea for stronger remedies, particularly those involving roots or tougher plant parts. You'd prepare a decoction. This involved simmering the plant material directly in water for a longer period, sometimes 15 to 30 minutes, or even longer. Think of preparing a hearty soup, but with medicinal roots instead of vegetables. This longer, more robust cooking extracts compounds that are not as easily released by simple infusion. Valerian root for sleep, or willow bark for pain, would typically be prepared as decoctions to ensure maximum potency. The resulting liquid would often be darker, more concentrated, and more intensely flavored. Beyond teas, your monastic apothecary would also produce syrups and honeys. Honey, readily available from the monastery's own beehives, was not just a sweetener. It had its own antiseptic and soothing properties. You might infuse herbs like thyme or hyssop into honey to create a cough syrup, or combine it with lemon balm for a general tonic. These were particularly useful for children or those who found the taste of straight herbal infusions too bitter. A spoonful of medicated honey was often a welcome sight for a sore throat. Ointments and salves were another vital part of your repertoire. These were primarily for external application for wounds, rashes, burns, and aching joints. You'd take dried or fresh herbs, perhaps comfrey for bruises or plantain for cuts, and gently heat them with a base like beeswax or animal fat lard was common. The herbs would infuse their properties into the fat, and once cooled, the mixture would solidify into a soothing, protective balm. Imagine carefully rubbing a beeswax and lavender ointment onto someone's aching temples to soothe a headache. It's a tactile, comforting form of care. One mainstream historical fact to consider here is the significant role of alcohol in medieval medicine. While not always soothing in the gentle tea sense, alcoholic tinctures or wine-based infusions were incredibly common. Wine was often used as a solvent to extract compounds from herbs that weren't water-soluble, creating more potent medicines. For instance, wormwood or other bitter herbs might be steeped in wine to create a tonic. The alcohol acted both as an extractor and a preservative, allowing the remedies to be stored for longer periods. It also served, of course, to somewhat numb the pain, if nothing else. Historians still argue about the precise alcohol content of these medieval medicinal wines, but it's safe to say they were not entirely non-alcoholic. A quirky tidbit: some monastic records indicate that monks occasionally used very specific, almost ritualistic, prayers or blessings during the preparation of remedies. While the efficacy was, of course, in the herbs themselves, the act of prayer was believed to imbue the medicine with additional spiritual healing power. It's a reminder of the deeply integrated worldview where the physical and spiritual were never truly separate. So, as you crushed herbs, you might also be quietly murmuring a verse from the Psalms, imbuing each movement with sacred intent. The cleanliness, or rather the relative lack thereof by modern standards, was a constant challenge. While monks were often more hygienic than the general population due to their disciplined routines, sterile environments were a distant dream. Tools would be washed, but not truly sterilized. Hands would be cleaned, but not necessarily with antiseptic. Yet, despite these limitations, the careful attention to detail and the use of naturally antimicrobial herbs often mitigated the risks of infection. It highlights the resilience of the human body and the often underestimated power of natural remedies when administered with care. The infirmarian's duties weren't just about preparing remedies. They were about observation and dosage. You would carefully observe the patient's response, adjusting the strength or combination of herbs as needed. Too much valerian could make a patient overly drowsy, while too little wouldn't be effective. It was a constant learning process, building on experience and the wisdom gleaned from those ancient herbals you so diligently copied. This wasn't a one-size-fits-all approach. It was highly individualized care, a bespoke medieval pharmacy service. This entire process, from garden to cup, was a cycle of quiet, sustained effort. It required not just knowledge, but also immense patience. Herbs had to grow, be harvested at the right time, dried correctly, and then carefully prepared. There were no shortcuts. This slow pace, however, was also inherently soothing. For both the monk preparing the remedy and the patient receiving it, the very slowness of the process could contribute to a sense of calm and healing. You're not rushing to solve a problem. You're allowing nature and time to do their work. Consider the role of the monastic kitchen in this process, too. While the apothecary was for medicines, the kitchen was where nourishing broths, simple gruels, and healing foods were prepared. Often, the infirmarian would work closely with the kitchen master, requesting specific ingredients for a recovering patient, perhaps a light chicken broth fortified with warming spices, or a simple porridge enhanced with restorative herbs. Food, in the medieval understanding, was often the first medicine, and its careful preparation was seen as equally important as the herbal remedies. The meticulousness extended to storage. Once prepared, the teas, tinctures, and ointments would be stored in earthenware jars, wooden boxes, or perhaps even glass bottles if the monastery was wealthy enough to afford them. Labels, though simple, would be clear, indicating the contents and sometimes the intended use. Imagine a dimly lit storeroom, shelves neatly organized, with dozens of identical-looking pots, each holding a different, carefully prepared remedy. It's a testament to the monk's dedication to order and efficiency. Ultimately, the act of preparing these remedies was more than just a physical task. It was an act of profound charity and compassion. For the monks, healing the sick was a direct reflection of their spiritual commitment, an embodiment of Christian love. Every ground herb, every stirred concoction, every carefully poured infusion was infused with this deeper meaning. It was a tangible expression of their vow of service, offered quietly and without expectation of reward. So, as you gently strain that valerian decoction for a restless brother, you're not just making a drink, you're continuing a tradition of natural healing, meticulously practiced and preserved within the quiet walls of your monastery. You're blending ancient wisdom with practical skill, offering comfort and care, one soothing, earthy, slightly bitter, but ultimately calming cup at a time. It's a testament to the enduring power of simple remedies, prepared with intention, in a world that truly needed a moment of peace. With your apothecary shelves now stocked with prepared remedies, from steaming infusions to carefully mixed salves, your focus would naturally turn to the heart of this healing mission. The very specific concoctions designed to bring tranquility and sleep. In a world without modern pharmaceuticals, the medieval infirmarian was essentially the master of natural sedatives and calming agents. Imagine the quiet desperation of a patient racked by pain or anxiety, unable to find rest. Your secret recipes for soothing herbal teas would have been nothing short of a godsend. Let's delve into some of these specific formulations. The quiet elixirs that promised a peaceful slumber, the undisputed champion of sleep aids in your medieval monastic toolkit would undoubtedly be valerian root. We've touched on it, but its significance can't be overstated. Imagine taking the dried, often gnarly pieces of this root. It's earthy, sometimes slightly cheesy aroma filling your quiet apothecary. You'd meticulously grind it in your mortar, transforming it into a coarse powder. Then, for maximum effect, you wouldn't just steep it. No, valerian required a decoction, simmering gently in water for a good 15 to 20 minutes. This slow, steady heat was crucial for extracting the compounds responsible for its sedative properties. The resulting tea would be dark, perhaps a little cloudy, and certainly potent. It wasn't about flavor here, it was about effect. You'd probably sweeten it with a generous dollop of honey to make it more palatable for the patient, easing the strong, earthy notes. But valerian wasn't used in isolation. Often, you'd combine it with other calming herbs to create a more comprehensive, soothing effect. Think of it as a medieval sleep cocktail, tailored for optimum rest. A classic pairing would be valerian with chamomile. While valerian induces sleep, chamomile gently calms the nervous system and eases digestive upset, which could often keep a patient awake. You'd steep the delicate chamomile flowers for a shorter period, perhaps adding them towards the end of the valerian decoctions, simmering, or preparing a separate infusion to mix in. The bright, apple-like scent of chamomile would offer a fragrant counterpoint to valerian's earthiness, making the remedy more pleasant to consume. Another invaluable herb for promoting tranquility was lemon balm, Melissa officinalis. This plant, with its vibrant green leaves and distinctly citrusy aroma, was believed not only to soothe the body, but also to uplift the spirit. For a patient suffering from melancholy or persistent worry that prevented sleep, a strong lemon balm infusion would be invaluable. It was often combined with chamomile for a gentle, uplifting, and calming tea, perfect for those times when anxiety, rather than physical pain, was the primary obstacle to rest. Imagine the monastic equivalent of aromatherapy, just inhaling the steam from a cup of fresh lemon balm. Tea could bring a sense of immediate calm for more severe cases of insomnia or intense restlessness. You might turn to passion flower, passiflora. This strikingly beautiful plant, with its intricate, almost alien-looking blossoms, was known for its powerful sedative and anxiolytic anti-anxiety properties. The dried leaves and flowers would be steeped to create an infusion, sometimes combined with valerian for enhanced effect. It was often reserved for patients who seemed particularly agitated or unable to settle, offering a deeper level of relaxation than simpler herbs. Historians still argue whether the monks fully understood the specific neurochemical pathways involved, but their empirical observations of its effectiveness were spot dash on dot. It's also worth noting the use of lavender angustifolia, while commonly associated with scent and relaxation today. In the medieval monastery, it was also valued for its medicinal properties. A tea made from lavender flowers could help ease headaches and reduce nervous tension, both common culprits. Behind sleepless nights, you might find it in blends designed for general relaxation before bedtime, rather than for deep sedation. It was often a component of the gentler, more aromatic sleep aids. Now, a quirky tidbit. Some monastic herbals occasionally listed what we might now consider sleep-inducing practices that weren't strictly herbal. These could include things like quiet contemplation before bed, listening to the gentle chanting of vespers, or even placing certain fragrant herbs like lavender or hops, yes, the stuff in beer, inside pillows to promote rest. So, while the teas were potent, the overall monastic environment, with its emphasis on routine and quiet, was inherently conducive to sleep. It's a holistic approach to rest, combining internal remedies with external calm. The actual process of preparing these specific sleep teas would involve careful measurement. While not as precise as modern pharmacies, there was an understanding of dosage. Too little, and the remedy wouldn't be effective. Too much, and it could cause unwanted side effects, though severe toxicity was less common with these milder sedatives. You might use small, specific scoops or spoons, perhaps even weighing small amounts of dried herbs on a simple balance scale, particularly for the more potent substances. The vessel itself mattered. A warm clay mug or a polished wooden bowl for serving the tea would have been used, perhaps even specifically designated for infirmary use. The temperature of the tea would be warm, comforting, but not scalding, allowing the patient to sip it slowly and allowing the warmth to spread through their body, aiding relaxation. The act of receiving a warm drink from the infirmarian, accompanied by a quiet word of comfort or a whispered prayer, would itself have been incredibly soothing, providing psychological reassurance alongside the herbal benefits. The monk's understanding of the patient's needs went beyond simply treating symptoms. They knew that a patient who couldn't sleep might be anxious about their illness, worried about their family outside the walls, or simply distressed by their physical discomfort. The tea was part of a larger regimen of care that included spiritual counsel, a comforting presence, and the steady, reassuring rhythm of monastic life. The infirmary wasn't just a treatment center. It was a sanctuary of peace, a mainstream historical fact. Honey was almost universally used as a sweetener for these medicinal teas. Beyond its taste, it was recognized for its own healing properties, its natural antibacterial qualities, and its ability. It also helped to mask the sometimes bitter or earthy taste of the herbs, making the remedies more palatable, which was crucial for encouraging patients to actually consume them. Imagine trying to get a sick, fussy medieval patient to drink pure valerian decoction without a spoonful of something sweet. It probably wouldn't have gone over well. The efficacy of these monastic sleep aids, while not rigorously tested in clinical trials, was rooted in centuries of empirical observation. Monks noted which herbs worked best for which conditions, passing down their findings through those precious herbals and through oral tradition. While a modern sleep study might laugh at the methodology, the lived experience of countless medieval individuals attests to the effectiveness of these simple, natural remedies in bringing sorely needed rest. This quiet, dedicated work in the apothecary was a vital part of the monastic contribution to society. In a world where many people lived short, hard lives, full of pain and suffering, the monastery offered a place of respite and healing. The secret recipes for soothing herbal teas were not truly secret in the clandestine sense, but rather a carefully guarded and meticulously applied body of knowledge, nurtured and perfected within the monastic tradition. They were secrets of nature, unlocked through observation, faith, and patience. As you picture the monastic infirmarian preparing one of these precious brews, perhaps crushing the valerian root, adding chamomile blossoms, and pouring over the steaming water, imagine the hope each cup represented. For the restless, for the anxious, for the pain-racked, it was a promise of escape, a gentle descent into the quiet embrace of sleep. It wasn't about grand medical breakthroughs, but about the profound power of simple remedies administered with care and compassion to bring comfort and peace in a difficult world. The aroma, the warmth, the very act of receiving such a thoughtful remedy all contributed to that sense of calm. While much of your time as a monastic infirmarian was dedicated to caring for your fellow brothers, the monastery's healing mission often extended far beyond its quiet walls. Imagine, for a moment, the contrast inside the ordered tranquility of the cloister, the methodical rhythm of prayers and work, outside the rough and tumble of medieval village life, where sickness was a constant, unwelcome companion and formal medical care was almost non-existent. Monasteries, particularly larger, wealthier ones, became beacons of healing and charity for the surrounding populace, and your knowledge of herbal teas and remedies was a vital part of that outreach. You see, for the common medieval peasant or villager, access to even basic medical help was incredibly scarce. There were no hospitals in the modern sense, and secular physicians were few, expensive, and largely concentrated in larger towns and cities. So, when illness struck, often their only recourse was folk remedies, the local wise woman, or, if they were fortunate enough to live near one, the monastic infirmary. This wasn't just a charitable act. It was seen as a fundamental Christian duty, deeply ingrained in the monastic rule. Providing care for the sick and the poor was a direct act of service to God. So, how did this knowledge, nurtured within the monastery, get shared with the wider world? It wasn't through public lectures or published pamphlets, of course. It was far more direct and personal. Villagers would travel, sometimes for miles, to seek aid from the monks. You would have seen them, weary and often desperate, knocking on the monastery gates. Perhaps a mother with a feverish child, a farmer with a festering wound, or an elderly woman plagued by chronic pain and sleepless nights. Upon their arrival, they wouldn't just be given a quick glance and a bottle. They would likely be brought to a dedicated area near the infirmary, perhaps a guest house or a simple waiting room. You, the infirmarian, would examine them, listen patiently to their complaints, and offer what comfort and counsel you could. This personal interaction was key. It built trust and offered reassurance in a world that could be terrifyingly uncertain. Then would come the practical application of your knowledge. For the feverish child, you might prepare a gentle elderflower infusion, explaining to the mother how to administer it to induce a mild sweat. For the sleepless elder, a carefully brewed valerian and chamomile tea, with instructions on its evening use, would be offered. These weren't just handed over. You'd explain the preparation if it needed to be brewed at home, the dosage, and what effects to expect. It was a form of basic medical education, patiently shared with those who had no other access to such wisdom. 1. Mainstream. Historical fact here is that many monasteries operated what were essentially rudimentary outpatient clinics or hospices for the local poor. These facilities were an extension of the infirmary, providing basic care, shelter, and sometimes even food for those who were too sick to work or had no one else to care for them. The infirmarian and his assistants would move between the monastery's internal infirmary and these external wards, offering continuous care. This charitable function was absolutely central to their public perception and their spiritual mission. The sharing wasn't always just about handing out remedies. Sometimes, monks would teach villagers about common healing plants that could be found in the local fields or woods. They might explain how to identify plantain for cuts, or where to find yarrow for fever, empowering the community to help themselves with simple, accessible remedies. It was a subtle form of public health education, built on practical knowledge and local resources. This transfer of knowledge was slow, organic, and often passed down through word of mouth, reinforcing the monastery's role as a benevolent knowledge hub. A quirky tidbit: some monastic records suggest that certain popular or particularly effective herbal recipes, especially for common ailments like coughs or digestive issues, would become informally known as the monk's cure in local villages. These recipes, often for soothing teas, would then be replicated, albeit perhaps less precisely, by the villagers themselves. It's like medieval branding for natural remedies, all thanks to the benevolent efforts of your quiet brothers. Consider the economic aspect, too. While charity was paramount, larger monasteries might sometimes engage in a form of exchange for their services. Perhaps a farmer, unable to pay in coin, would offer a portion of his harvest, or a family might send their son to work in the monastery fields for a season. This wasn't about profit, but about sustainability, allowing the monastery to continue its charitable work and maintain its extensive herb gardens and infirmary supplies. Historians still argue about the precise balance between pure charity and these forms of reciprocal exchange. But it's clear that the monks were a vital part of the local economy as well as the social fabric. The monastery also served as a refuge during times of epidemic. While they had no magical cure for widespread diseases like dysentery or measles, their disciplined routines, access to clean water, often from their own wells or springs, and knowledge of basic hygiene could sometimes offer a measure of protection or reduce the severity of outbreaks within their walls. When disease swept through a village, the infirmary might be overwhelmed, but the monks would still offer what comfort and palliative care they could, often providing the only source of structured support. Moreover, the monks acted as a vital source of literacy and learning for some within the wider community. While most peasants were illiterate, some children of noble or wealthy families might be sent to the monastery for education. Here, they would learn not only theology and Latin, but also practical skills, including elements of medicine and botany, from the infirmarian's work. While not directly about sharing herbal teas, this dissemination of knowledge through education was another way the monastic influence spread, subtly elevating the general understanding of health and natural remedies. In the wider world, the reputation of a monastery's infirmarian could extend far and wide. A skilled and compassionate healer would attract people from greater distances, enhancing the monastery's standing and drawing both spiritual and material support. This informal network of reputation was how knowledge of effective remedies and skilled healers spread across medieval landscapes, long before official medical journals or conferences existed. It was all word of mouth, amplified by genuine results. This outward focus also meant that the monks were constantly encountering new ailments, new challenges, and perhaps even new plants and folk remedies from the local population. While they relied on their ancient texts, they were also pragmatic observers. If a local remedy seemed to work, they might incorporate it into their own practice or document it in their herbals, slowly expanding their own practical knowledge base. This constant interaction meant monastic medicine was not static. It evolved, slowly incorporating both ancient wisdom and practical local experience. Think about the sheer amount of work involved. After a long night of prayers and a day of tending the garden, the infirmarian would still be called upon to attend to sick villagers, often late into the evening. It was a life of ceaseless service, driven by a deep sense of duty and compassion. Every prepared cup of chamomile for a child with a fever, every poultice applied to a farmer's wound, every reassuring word spoken to a worried family, these were all threads in the rich tapestry of monastic outreach. So, while we often picture monks as isolated figures, lost in prayer and study, remember that for many medieval people, the monastery was a place of tangible, life-saving help. It was where you went when all else failed, where you could find not just spiritual solace, but also a warm bed, a comforting presence, and, crucially, a soothing cup of herbal tea that might just ease your pain and bring the blessing of sleep. The quiet work of the infirmarian within the walls had a profound, often overlooked, impact on the vibrant, chaotic world just outside the gates. Their knowledge of herbal teas wasn't just for sleep. It was a lifeline, quietly extending from the monastic garden to the troubled world beyond. Beyond the quiet walls of your monastery and the immediate villagers you served, there was another crucial point of interaction where your herbal knowledge came into play: the steady stream of pilgrims and weary travelers. Imagine the constant flow of people traversing the medieval landscape: merchants, crusaders, wandering scholars, and, above all, pilgrims journeying to distant shrines. These were individuals often undertaking arduous, multi-week, or even multi-month journeys on foot, exposed to the elements, poor food, and the constant risk of injury or illness. Monasteries, strategically located along major pilgrimage routes, became indispensable havens, and your secret recipes for soothing herbal teas were often the first comfort offered. You see, for a pilgrim, the monastery wasn't just a spiritual stop, it was a literal lifesaver. After days, or even weeks, of trudging along muddy roads, sleeping rough, and subsisting on meager provisions, the sight of a monastery's walls would have been like a vision. It promised shelter, a warm meal, and, crucially, rest and healing. The monastic tradition of hospitality, rooted in the rule of Saint Benedict, dictated that all guests, especially the poor and pilgrims, were to be received as Christ himself. This wasn't just a polite suggestion. It was a fundamental tenet of their spiritual life. So, as a monastic infirmarian, you'd be accustomed to seeing a variety of ailments brought through the gates by these transient guests. There would be blisters and foot injuries from endless walking, exhaustion from relentless travel, fevers from exposure, and digestive upsets from unfamiliar or spoiled food. And, perhaps most commonly, a profound sense of weariness and anxiety, exacerbated by the dangers and uncertainties of their journey. For many, a good night's sleep was a rare luxury on the road, making your sleep-inducing teas particularly valuable. Imagine a pilgrim arriving at dusk, their clothes caked in mud, their face drawn with fatigue, perhaps limping from a sprained ankle. After being welcomed and offered a simple meal, they would likely be directed to the infirmary or a dedicated guest house annex, where you or the infirmarian would assess their needs. For those suffering from simple exhaustion and difficulty sleeping, your go-to would be that gentle, effective chamomile and lemon balm tea, perhaps with a touch of honey to sweeten it and offer quick energy. It's a simple remedy, but the warmth, the comforting aroma, and the very act of being cared for would work wonders. For a pilgrim struggling with persistent body aches and pains from days of walking, you might prepare a decoction of willow bark for its pain-relieving properties, or perhaps a more external remedy, like a comfrey and beeswax salve to rub on their sore muscles. You wouldn't be performing surgery, but you could provide significant palliative care, making their onward journey possible. One mainstream historical fact here is that many monasteries along major pilgrimage routes, such as the Camino de Santiago in Spain or routes to Rome and the Holy Land, developed extensive hospices specifically for pilgrims. These were often separate buildings, sometimes quite large, providing dormitory-style accommodation, basic food, and medical attention. They were a crucial part of the medieval travel infrastructure, facilitating the massive movement of people across continents. Your work as an infirmarian in such a monastery would involve a constant influx of new patients, each with their own story and their own set of ailments. A quirky tidbit: some accounts suggest that pilgrims, once recovered, would sometimes leave behind unique seeds or cuttings from their own regions as a token of gratitude. This informal exchange could introduce new plant species to the monastery's herb garden, slowly enriching its botanical diversity. Imagine a monk excitedly identifying a new variety of mint or a previously unknown healing herb, brought all the way from distant lands by a grateful traveler. It's a wonderful, organic way that knowledge and resources spread. Historians still debate the true extent of this botanical cross-pollination, but the anecdotes suggest it was a charming and practical aspect of pilgrimage. The monastery also served as a place for pilgrims to recuperate from more serious illnesses or injuries before continuing their journey. If a pilgrim developed a severe fever or a bad infection, they might stay in the infirmary for days or even weeks, receiving continuous care from you and your assistants. During this time, the regular rhythm of monastic life, the prayers, the quiet atmosphere, and the nourishing, carefully prepared food, often simple gruels and broths, fortified with herbs, would contribute significantly to their recovery. It was a complete care package, delivered with spiritual dedication. Think about the psychological impact on these pilgrims. Away from home, often alone, facing unknown dangers, falling ill on the road would have been terrifying. The monastery offered not just physical healing, but immense spiritual and psychological comfort. The presence of compassionate monks, the chance to confess sins, to attend Mass, and to simply be in a place of peace would have been deeply reassuring. Your soothing herbal teas weren't just for the body. They were for the anxious mind and the weary spirit. A cup of valerian tea, administered with a kind word, could do wonders for a soul tormented by fear. The exchange went both ways, too. While pilgrims received care, they also brought news from afar, stories from other lands, and sometimes even unique ailments or conditions you hadn't encountered before. This forced the infirmarian to constantly adapt and learn, adding to his empirical knowledge base. It was a dynamic, albeit slow, form of continuing medical education. Consider the role of the monastic kitchen, again here. For exhausted and often malnourished pilgrims, restorative broths made with nutrient-rich herbs like nettle or dandelion, along with simple, digestible foods, were as important as any herbal remedy. A warm bowl of lentil soup or a piece of freshly baked bread could begin the healing process even before the first sip of tea. The monastic cook and the infirmarian often worked hand in glove to ensure proper nutrition for recovering guests. The reputation of certain monasteries for their healing prowess would spread along these pilgrimage routes, much like an early form of word-of-mouth marketing. A monastery known for its effective remedies or a particularly skilled infirmarian would become a preferred stop for travelers, further solidifying its role as a vital center of care. This informal network of information meant that a monk's quiet dedication in his herb garden could have a far-reaching impact, affecting the health and well-being of people from across vast distances. Historians still argue about the precise number of pilgrims that passed through these monastic hospices annually, but the consensus is that it was in the tens of thousands, perhaps even hundreds of thousands, across Europe's major routes. This sheer volume underscores the monumental, often unsung, contribution of monasteries to medieval public health and travel safety. They were literally keeping people alive and well enough to continue their spiritual journeys. And what about the concept of preventive care for these travelers? While difficult on the road, monks might offer simple advice on hygiene, the importance of resting, and perhaps even some dried herbs to carry with them as a preventative measure. A small packet of dried chamomile for a restless night, or a bit of dried ginger for digestive issues, could be a small but significant comfort on a long journey. It was a pragmatic approach to health maintenance in challenging circumstances. So, as you picture the steady flow of pilgrims through your monastery gates, remember that each one represented an opportunity for an act of charity, a moment of healing, and a quiet demonstration of the monastic commitment to service. Your secret recipes for soothing herbal teas, brewed with care and compassion, were not just remedies. They were tangible expressions of hospitality, hope, and the promise of a peaceful night's rest, allowing weary souls to find strength and continue their sacred quest. It's a beautiful, understated aspect of medieval history, quietly unfolding one cup of tea at a time. While your monastic infirmary buzzed with the quiet industry of healing, blending ancient wisdom with practical herbal remedies, the wider medieval world often viewed illness through a very different lens, one heavily steeped in superstition and religious belief. As a monk healer, you navigated this complex landscape, often blending your botanical knowledge with spiritual rituals, trying to offer solace in a world where the lines between the natural and supernatural were deeply blurred. Imagine a villager presenting with a persistent fever, while you, with your knowledge of willow bark and elderflower, might diagnose it as a natural imbalance or a common contagion, a sign of God's displeasure, or even the lingering touch of a mischievous fly. They might have already tried remedies rooted in folk magic, perhaps carrying a specific amulet, burying a lock of hair, or visiting a local cunning woman for a charm. Your role was often to bridge these two worlds, offering practical care while acknowledging and sometimes incorporating their deeply held beliefs. One mainstream historical fact is that throughout the Middle Ages, the distinction between what we now call medicine and religious practice was often non-existent. Healing was inherently seen as a divine act, and prayer, relics, and pilgrimages were considered legitimate forms of treatment alongside herbal remedies, where both the physical and spiritual aspects of illness could be addressed. This meant that while you might be brewing a valerian tea for sleep, you might also be encouraging prayer, offering a blessing, or even providing a piece of blessed bread. Consider the role of saints. Many saints were associated with healing specific ailments. Saint Anthony was invoked against skin diseases like Saint Anthony's fire, a severe form of ergotism. Pilgrimages to their shrines or veneration of their relics were considered powerful acts of healing. So, a patient in your infirmary might not just be asking for an herbal infusion. They might also be asking for a prayer to Saint Benedict for healing, or for a piece of cloth that had touched a local saint's tomb. You, as the infirmarian, would facilitate this, understanding that spiritual comfort was as vital as physical intervention. A quirky tidbit: some medieval medical manuscripts, even those copied by monks, contained remedies that bordered on the truly fantastical. Alongside perfectly rational herbal prescriptions, you might find instructions for remedies involving incantations, astrological timing for harvesting herbs, or even ingredients like powdered mummy or unicorn horn, though these were incredibly rare and likely only used by the wealthiest. While these were probably far less common in the daily practice of a humble monastery, their inclusion in scholarly texts shows the pervasive influence of magical thinking and the struggle to differentiate between empirically observed effectiveness and sheer superstition. Historians still argue whether monks truly believed in the efficacy of these more outlandish remedies. Of the four humors, as we discussed, also played into this blend of science and belief. An imbalance of humors was not just a physical state. It could also be influenced by moral failing or divine will. So, if a patient had too much black bile leading to melancholy, spiritual guidance to address any perceived sin that contributed to the imbalance. It was a comprehensive approach encompassing body, mind, and soul. Fear of demons and evil spirits was widespread. If a patient exhibited symptoms like seizures, delirium, or certain mental illnesses, it was often attributed to demonic possession. While you, as an infirmarian, might try to administer calming herbs, the primary treatment might involve exorcism rituals performed by the abbot or a designated priest. Your role would be supportive, providing comfort and perhaps administering herbs to mitigate the physical symptoms while the spiritual battle unfolded. Conditions.dreams were also imbued with significant meaning. If a patient was suffering from nightmares or restless sleep, it might not just be seen as an issue needing a valerian tea. Instead, the dreams might be interpreted as divine messages, warnings, or even visitations from spirits. Monks, with their training in theology and scriptural interpretation, might be consulted to help interpret these dreams, offering spiritual advice alongside the herbal remedies for sleep. The goal wasn't just to make the dream stop. Every plant, every animal, every natural phenomenon was part of God's creation, imbued with divine purpose and symbolic meaning. This reverence informed the collection and preparation of herbs. You weren't just gathering leaves, you were gathering God's medicine, and the act itself was a form of prayer. To every cup of chamomile tea you brewed, consider the notion of miracle cures. While you diligently worked with your herbs, any sudden or unexpected recovery might be attributed to divine intervention, a direct miracle rather than the efficacy of your remedies. This didn't diminish your work. Rather, it glorified God, and your efforts were seen as instruments of His will. It fostered a sense of humility, recognizing that ultimately all healing came from a higher power. This blend of the practical and the struck, it was often seen as divine judgment. While monks would still offer practical care and herbal remedies, large-scale prayers, processions, and acts of penance would be organized to appease God and halt the spread of the disease. Your soothing herbal teas became part of a larger spiritual battle against an unseen enemy, a quiet act of comfort in the face of overwhelming fear. Another aspect of this intertwining was the use of relics. Monasteries often possessed relics of saints, a bone fragment, a piece of clothing, or some other sacred object. These relics were believed to possess healing power. A patient might be brought into contact with a relic, or a potion might be touched to it before being administered. While the chamomile tea worked its soothing magic, the belief in the relic's power provided immense psychological comfort and hope, an unquantifiable but significant part of the healing process. Historians still argue about the relative importance of these spiritual and superstitious elements compared to the actual pharmacological effects of the herbs. It's hard to say definitively how much was placebo and how much was true biological action. But what is clear is that for the medieval person, these elements were inseparable. You couldn't have one without the other. The monk, by combining practical herbalism with spiritual solace, offered a comprehensive approach to healing that met the needs of the whole person as understood in their time. Even the architecture of the infirmary sometimes reflected these beliefs. There might be a small chapel or an altar within the infirmary itself, allowing sick patients to participate in prayer or to gaze upon sacred images. The very layout was designed to create an atmosphere conducive to both physical and spiritual recovery. It wasn't just a place of medicine. It was a place of worship and spiritual refuge. So, as you quietly minister to a patient, perhaps giving them a soothing cup of lemon balm tea for their anxious thoughts, remember that you are also, in a way, a spiritual guide. You are helping them navigate not just their physical illness, but also their deeply ingrained fears, beliefs, and hopes for divine intervention. Compassion. In a world where every cough and ache could carry cosmic significance, your role was to ground them, to offer tangible comfort. Tandem with the powerful, often mysterious, forces of medieval faith and superstition, creating a unique tapestry of healing. Stepping away from the fragrant confines of your monastic apothecary and the quiet spiritual battles against illness, let's turn our attention to another vital, often overlooked, space within the monastery walls where health and well-being were constantly at play: the kitchen. You see, for the medieval monk, health wasn't just about remedies brewed in the infirmary. It was profoundly intertwined with what was consumed, how it was prepared, and the rhythmic cycle of meals that governed daily life. The monastery kitchen wasn't just a place for sustenance. It was an integral part of the holistic approach to health, often working hand in glove with the infirmarian. Imagine the monastic kitchen, a bustling, yet often surprisingly quiet space in a large monastery. There would be the rhythmic chopping of vegetables, the gentle bubbling of large cauldrons over an open fire, the earthy scent of grains and legumes, and the comforting aroma of baking bread. It wasn't a place of culinary extravagance, mind you. Monastic diets were generally austere, dictated by rules of fasting and abstinence, particularly from meat on many days of the week. But within these constraints, the kitchen played a crucial role in providing nourishing, digestible food that supported the health of the community. The food prepared in the monastic kitchen was often the first line of defense against illness. For a monk weakened by a fast or recovering from a fever, a carefully prepared broth, rich in nutrients, could be more vital than any herbal tea. The kitchen master or cellarer would work closely with you, the infirmarian, to ensure that specific dietary needs of the sick were met. If a patient had a delicate stomach, they might be prescribed a thin gruel made from oats or barley. For someone needing to regain strength, perhaps a restorative broth made with chicken on days when meat was permitted, or lentils. One mainstream historical fact about medieval monastic diets is their emphasis on cereals and legumes. Bread, usually a coarse, dark loaf made from wheat or rye, was the absolute staple, often consumed in vast quantities. Alongside this, monks ate a lot of pottage, a thick stew or porridge made from various grains, beans, peas, and whatever vegetables were available from the monastery's own gardens. This fiber-rich, plant-based diet, while simple, provided essential nutrients and helped maintain digestive regularity, which was a constant concern in an age without refined foods. Consider the role of specific foods as medicine. For example, garlic and onions, while culinary staples, were also recognized for their antiseptic and immune-boosting properties. They would be generously added to pottages and broths, not just for flavor, but for their perceived health benefits. Honey, as we've mentioned, was not just a sweetener, but a powerful antimicrobial, used both in the kitchen and the infirmary. And the wide variety of herbs grown in the monastery garden found their way into the kitchen, not just for taste, but for their digestive and general tonic effects. Mint for soothing, fennel for digestion, sage for invigorating. These blurred the lines between food and medicine. A quirky tidbit: some monastic kitchens had specific rules about which monks were allowed to cook for the infirmary. It wasn't just about culinary skill. It was also about spiritual purity and intention. The food for the sick was considered particularly sacred, and its preparation was seen as an act of devotion. So, the brother stirring the pot for a recovering patient might also be murmuring prayers, infusing the food with spiritual blessings, much like you would with your herbal teas. Historians still argue whether this added perceived efficacy or was purely for spiritual comfort, but it certainly highlights the holistic approach. The monastic calendar, with its numerous fasts and feast days, also significantly impacted the diet and, by extension, health. During periods of strict fasting, like Lent, when meat, dairy, and sometimes even fish were forbidden, monks would rely heavily on vegetables, legumes, and bread. While spiritually beneficial, prolonged fasting could lead to deficiencies, especially for those already frail. This is where your role as infirmarian became critical, perhaps prescribing a fortified herbal tonic or a richer, albeit meat-free, broth for a struggling brother. It was a constant balancing act between spiritual discipline and physical. Think about the sheer practicality of the kitchen's design. It would often feature a large hearth with hooks for hanging cauldrons, a well or water source nearby, and perhaps a massive stone oven for baking bread. Storage areas would be dark and cool, designed to preserve grains, dried legumes, and cured foods for months. This self-sufficiency was vital for a medieval institution, ensuring a steady supply of food regardless of external conditions. The kitchen was, in essence, the monastery's metabolic engine, fueling both its physical and spiritual activities. The monastic diet, despite its austerity, was often healthier than that of the average peasant. Monasteries generally had better access to clean water, a more varied diet due to their extensive gardens and agricultural lands, and a more consistent supply of food, free from the famines that often afflicted the wider population. This relative dietary stability contributed significantly to the monks' overall health and longevity compared to their secular counterparts. It highlights the often overlooked benefit of monastic life, a predictable, albeit simple, diet. The preparation of drinks in the kitchen was also significant. Water was often unsafe, so monks, like much of medieval society, drank a lot of ale or beer. This wasn't the strong, intoxicating brew of modern pubs. It was a weak, often thin, fermented beverage made from grain, known as small beer. It was a safer alternative to water and provided some calories and nutrients. Monasteries were famous for their breweries, and this small beer was consumed throughout the day by all, including the infirm. It was considered a basic necessity, not a luxury. Historians still argue about the exact nutritional contribution of small beer to the medieval diet, but it undoubtedly offered hydration and a safer alternative to contaminated water beyond daily meals. The kitchen also prepared special foods for those celebrating important feast days or for honored guests, while the infirmary focused on healing. The kitchen could provide moments of celebration and communal bonding through food. This contributed to overall well-being, as social connection and moments of joy are also vital for health. It wasn't always gruel and broth, even for monks. The waste management of the kitchen also had health implications. Monasteries, particularly large ones, would have systems for disposing of organic waste, often through composting or feeding it to livestock, which helped reduce pest infestations and improve sanitation compared to many medieval towns. This practical, albeit rudimentary, approach to hygiene contributed to a healthier monastic environment, indirectly supporting the work of the infirmarian. Ultimately, the monastic kitchen and its operations were a testament to medieval pragmatism and self-sufficiency. It was a place where common ingredients were transformed into sustenance, where basic dietary principles were understood intuitively, and where the preparation of food for the sick was seen as an act of profound compassion. Your role as infirmarian might have been to prescribe the chamomile tea, but the kitchen's role was to provide the foundation of nourishing food that allowed the body to heal and absorb the benefits of those teas. So, as you picture the monastery, don't just envision the solemn chapel or the quiet scriptorium. Imagine also the bustling, earthy heart of the kitchen, filled with the warmth of the fire and the comforting aromas of simple, wholesome food. It was here that the basic building blocks of health were created, supporting the very fabric of life and quietly contributing to the well-being of the brothers and the community they served. The role of food in monastic health, often overlooked, was as fundamental as any herbal remedy, a constant, quiet hum of nourishment, supporting the delicate balance of body and soul. Having explored the practical art of herbal tea preparation and the fundamental role of the monastic kitchen in maintaining health, let's now venture into some of the more unusual cures and concoctions that found their way into medieval monastic medicine. While your daily practice as an infirmarian would largely revolve around sensible herbal remedies, the tapestry of medieval healing was interwoven with threads of folklore, limited scientific understanding, and sometimes ingredients that would make a modern physician blanch. This isn't to say monks were constantly dabbling in the bizarre, but their inherited knowledge and the prevailing beliefs of the time meant some truly peculiar practices existed. Imagine, if you will, perusing an ancient herbal or medical text. In the scriptorium, perhaps one you were painstakingly copying, alongside perfectly logical descriptions of chamomile for sleep or willow bark for pain. Your eye might catch an entry that seems a bit off-kilter. This is where the blend of genuine observation and speculative theory truly gets interesting and occasionally unsettling. One widely accepted, though ultimately unscientific, theory that influenced many unusual cures was the doctrine of signatures. This belief held that God had marked plants with signs that indicated their healing purpose. For instance, a plant with heart-shaped leaves might be used for heart ailments. A herb with yellow flowers, like St. John's wort, might be considered good for jaundice, a yellowing of the skin, and a plant with a root resembling a human figure, like the mythical mandrake, was believed to have profound, almost magical, healing properties for human conditions. While charming and sometimes coincidentally correct, as in the case of St. John's wort having actual antidepressant effects, it led to some rather tenuous connections and peculiar remedies. Historians still argue how much this doctrine truly guided practice versus merely being a retrospective justification for already observed effects. A quirky tidbit: one of the more famously unusual cures found in some medieval texts involved the use of crocodile dung. Yes, you heard that right. While not a monastic staple by any means, thank goodness, historical records from places like ancient Egypt and even some later medieval recipes suggest its use, often as a topical application for skin conditions or as an ingredient in complex poultices. Imagine trying to explain that one to a patient. It serves as a stark reminder of the desperate measures and limited knowledge in the absence of modern pharmacology. You probably wouldn't have it in your regular monastic apothecary supply, but you might have read about it with a raised eyebrow. Another category of unusual remedies involved the use of animal products, sometimes in rather grisly ways. While monks primarily focused on plants, some traditions incorporated animal parts believed to have specific healing powers. Powdered staghorn might be used for weakness or certain fevers. Bear grease might be used for aching joints or skin ailments. These were often rooted in sympathetic magic, believing that the strength or characteristics of the animal could be transferred to the patient. It's a bit like wishing you could absorb the energy of a hummingbird to cure your lethargy, but with actual animal parts. Then there were the internal concoctions that were simply unpleasant. While your soothing herbal teas like chamomile and lemon balm were generally palatable, some medieval medicines were incredibly bitter, sour, or just plain disgusting. Patients were often expected to endure these for the sake of healing. For example, strong purges and emetics, substances that induce vomiting, often made from potent herbs, were frequently used to balance the humors by expelling perceived excesses. It's safe to say these weren't designed for relaxation. A mainstream historical fact that often surprises modern audiences is the continued use of bloodletting and cupping. While not herbal, these practices were deeply ingrained in medieval medical theory, particularly the humoral theory. If a patient was believed to have an excess of blood-sanguine temperament or another humor, a small amount of blood might be intentionally removed, or glass cups might be applied to the skin to draw blood to the surface. While some modern studies suggest very limited therapeutic benefits for specific conditions like reducing swelling in rare cases of severe injury, in the medieval context, it was often overused and could weaken already ill patients. You, as an infirmarian, might assist with these procedures, even if your primary focus was herbs. Historians still argue about the true effectiveness and harm caused by widespread bloodletting, with modern consensus leaning towards significant harm in most cases. Some monastic medical texts even ventured into the realm of precious stones and metals. Powdered pearls were sometimes prescribed for melancholy or heart conditions, believed to impart their purity and strength. Gold, in various forms, was also occasionally used, thought to have life-giving properties. These were, of course, incredibly expensive remedies, reserved for the very wealthy or powerful, and certainly not part of your daily herbal tea menu for the common villager. But their inclusion in scholarly texts shows the range of substances considered for healing. The medieval understanding of toxicology was also rudimentary. While monks knew that some plants were poisonous, like deadly nightshade or foxglove, in high doses, the concept of precise dosage for potent remedies was often more art than science. This led to instances where a cure, improperly prepared or administered, could be as dangerous as the disease itself. This is why the meticulousness of your work in the apothecary and the faithful copying of detailed instructions in the herbals was so critically important. It wasn't just about making tea. It was about avoiding harm. Think about the psychological power of some of these unusual cures. Even if scientifically ineffective, the sheer spectacle or rarity of a remedy could inspire profound belief and hope in a patient. If you believed a charm made from a specific bone fragment would cure your fever, that belief alone could sometimes trigger the body's own healing mechanisms, a powerful placebo effect. In a world where direct, effective treatments for many diseases were absent, hope itself was a potent medicine. The use of amulets and talismans was also common, even among some religious individuals. These might be small pouches containing specific herbs, a piece of parchment with a blessing, or even a particular bone. While monks would emphasize prayer, they might not always discourage simple, harmless folk practices if they offered comfort to a patient. It was a fine line to walk between Christian doctrine and popular superstition. It's important to remember that these unusual remedies were often part of a broader, more practical healing system. They didn't replace the efficacy of chamomile for sleep or mint for digestion. Instead, they existed alongside them, reflecting a worldview that was comfortable with mystery and less reliant on empirical proof than modern science. Your role as infirmarian was to apply the most effective treatments available, but also to understand and respect the cultural beliefs of those you served. So, while the image of a medieval monk calmly brewing soothing herbal teas for sleep is largely accurate for daily practice, it's worth acknowledging the broader, sometimes stranger, context of medieval medicine. From crocodile dung to powdered pearls, the unusual cures and concoctions highlight the fascinating blend of observation, tradition, and belief that characterized healing in an age far removed from our own. It's a testament to human ingenuity, desperation, and the enduring quest for relief, even when operating in the dim light of limited scientific understanding. Having explored the more curious corners of medieval medicine, let's now turn to a particularly enduring and, perhaps, surprising aspect of monastic life that directly intersected with health: the monastic brewing traditions. You might not immediately connect the frothy head of a medieval ale with the quiet solace of soothing herbal teas, but in the context of the Middle Ages, they were intimately linked. Monasteries were not just centers of prayer and learning. They were often highly organized, self-sufficient communities, and that self-sufficiency often included brewing their own beer. And this wasn't just for pleasure. It was a fundamental component of diet, hydration, and, indeed, health. Imagine the monastic brewhouse. A warm, you'd hear the rhythmic sloshing of water, the gentle bubbling of fermentation vats, and the earthy aroma of malted barley filling the air. No, the vast majority of monastic brewing was dedicated to producing small beer or table beer a week, low-alcohol beverage that was a staple of the medieval diet. Why beer? For a very simple yet profound reason: water quality. In the Middle Ages, clean, safe drinking water was a luxury, not a given. Rivers and wells were often contaminated, leading to widespread waterborne diseases. Boiling water to make beer, even weak beer, killed off harmful bacteria, making it a much safer alternative to unboiled water. So, monks, like many people in medieval Europe, consumed beer throughout the day, including at mealtimes, not just for its mild effects. Their daily fluid needs. One mainstream historical fact is that many medieval monasteries became renowned for their brewing expertise, producers of beer not just for internal consumption, but also for sale to the local community, pilgrims, and travelers. This helped support the monastery financially and cemented its role as an economic hub. The very existence of monastic breweries speaks volumes about the centrality of beer to daily life and health. As you would work with the kitchen and brew house to ensure that even the sick and recovering brothers had access to this safer form of hydration. Small beer was considered nourishing and easily digestible, making it suitable even for those with delicate stomachs. It provided calories and some nutrients, which could be vital for someone recovering from illness, particularly during periods of fasting when other forms of sustenance were limited. It wasn't exactly a chamomile tea for sleep, but it was a crucial part of the overall health regimen. A quirky tidbit: Some monastic brewing records indicate the occasional addition of certain herbs to their beer, not just for flavor, but for perceived medicinal benefits. While hops were the primary bittering agent, some recipes mention additions like groot, a mixture of herbs like bog myrtle, yarrow, and rosemary, or even small amounts of wormwood or nettle. These could impart mild tonic effects or aid digestion, blurring the lines between beer as a beverage and beer as a mild, everyday medicine. Historians still argue about the exact prevalence and medicinal intent of these herbal beer additions. But the idea that monks were constantly experimenting with beneficial plant compounds is certainly consistent with their holistic approach. The process of brewing itself was a disciplined, almost meditative art, much like tending the herb garden. It involved malting the grain, sprouting, and then drying barley to convert starches into sugars, mashing it to extract those sugars, boiling the wort, the sugary liquid, with hops, and then fermenting it with yeast. Each step required precision and cleanliness by medieval standards to ensure a palatable and safe product. This was practical chemistry, refined over centuries of trial and error within the monastic walls. Think about the labor involved. It wasn't just a leisure activity, it was serious work. Monks would be involved in every stage, from cultivating the barley in the monastic fields to bottling or kegging the finished product. This physical labor, combined with the often sparse monastic diet, meant that the sustenance provided by beer was truly essential. It kept them energized for their prayers, their studies, and their manual work. The distinction between different strengths of beer was also important for health. While the general population might drink stronger ales on feast days, the everyday small beer had a very low alcohol content, typically less than 1 to 2%. This meant it was hydrating without being intoxicating, allowing monks to maintain sobriety while still consuming a safer beverage. For the sick, even a slightly weaker version might be brewed, tailored specifically for their delicate condition. It was a common understanding that excessive alcohol was detrimental to health, even if the definition of excessive was different from ours. The very availability of fewer waterborne illnesses meant less strain on the infirmary and healthier monks who could contribute more effectively to the monastery's functions. Mundane aspects of daily life had profound health implications in the medieval world. Historians still debate the exact. While low in alcohol, they provided carbohydrates, some B vitamins from the yeast, and various minerals, making them a more nutritious drink than plain water, especially if the water itself was of poor quality, and micronutrients, contributing to the monk's overall vitality. Consider the role of the brewhouse in the broader monastic self-sufficiency. Alongside the herb garden, the mill, the bakery, and the livestock, the brewhouse was another pillar of the monastery's ability to sustain itself and its charitable mission. It minimized reliance on external, potentially unsafe resources and ensured a stable supply of a fundamental dietary component. This self-reliance was a source of pride and security for the monastic community. And while you as infirmarian might be focused on the individual's direct healing, the brewhouse indirectly supported your efforts by providing a healthier baseline for the entire community. A healthier community meant fewer sick monks, fewer demands on the infirmary, and more resources available for external charity. It was a ripple effect of well-being starting with a humble pint of small beer. So, as you picture the monastery, let the quiet hum of the brewhouse join the rustle of leaves in the herb garden and the gentle scratching of quills in the scriptorium. They were integral parts of a sophisticated system of health and well-being tailored to the challenges of the medieval world. The monks' brewing traditions, often overlooked in favor of their spiritual and scholarly pursuits, were a testament to their practicality. One safely brewed, mild, and utterly essential pint at a time. It's a quiet testament to their ingenuity and a reminder that good health starts with good, safe basics, even if those basics come in a mug. Delved into the quiet alchemy of the infirmary and even explored the health implications of monastic brewing. But as the centuries turned, the golden age of monastic medical dominance, particularly after the High Middle Ages, began its slow, inexorable decline. Imagine, then, the gradual shifting of the landscape, not just geographically, but intellectually and socially, marking the changing landscape of medieval medicine. Almost imperceptible erosion of their once unparalleled authority in healthcare. The primary force behind this shift was the rise of universities and secular medical schools. While monasteries had been the primary custodians of medical knowledge for centuries, particularly in cities like Salerno, Montpellier, Padua, and Paris, these universities began to teach medicine as a distinct, specialized discipline, often drawing on new translations of Arabic medical texts, which had preserved and advanced Greek and Roman knowledge. These new secular institutions offered a more systematic, theoretical education in medicine, attracting ambitious students who sought formal qualifications. You, as a monastic infirmarian, might notice subtle changes. Perhaps fewer aspiring healers would seek direct apprenticeship in your infirmary, preferring the structured curriculum of a university. The knowledge being taught in these nascent medical schools was often more focused on anatomy, though still limited by the prohibition on human dissection. Sophisticated theories of disease and a wider range of pharmacological substances, often drawing from a broader international trade network than a monastery might have access to. Historians still argue whether the decline of monastic medicine was primarily due to the rise of these secular institutions, or if monasteries simply shifted their focus away from medical practice as other forms of care emerged. It's likely a complex interplay. Another significant factor was the changing role of the Church itself. While charity and care for the sick remained paramount, there were increasing calls for monastic orders to focus more strictly on their spiritual duties and less on worldly affairs, including extensive medical practice. Some religious reforms sought to draw monks back to a more contemplative, secluded life, which meant less direct involvement with the sick from outside the monastery walls. This wasn't a universal decree, but a gradual shift in emphasis within certain orders. Consider the Black Death in the mid-14th century, exposed the limitations of all medieval medicine, including that practiced in monasteries, while monks valiantly cared for the sick, often dying in the process. Their herbal teas and poultices, no matter how soothing, were powerless against the sheer scale and virulence of the plague. This devastating event likely contributed to a broader questioning of existing medical theories and practices, paving the way for new approaches, even if those approaches were slow to develop. It was a stark reality check on the limits of their knowledge, however dedicated they were. The development of new forms of urban healthcare also played a role. As towns and cities grew, so did the need for localized medical services. Guilds of barber surgeons emerged, offering practical, though often brutal, interventions. Physicians, trained in universities, set up practices. Early forms of municipal hospitals, though still rudimentary, began to appear. This meant that the common villager or pilgrim, who once had only the monastery to turn to, now had alternative, albeit sometimes equally limited, options. A quirky tidbit during this period: some medical texts began to incorporate new, often more aggressive, treatments that diverged significantly from the gentler, palliative approach favored by monks. Complex surgical procedures, often performed by barbers, who also cut hair, hence barber surgeons, and the use of more exotic, sometimes toxic, minerals or compounds. While monasteries largely stuck to their traditional plant-based remedies, like chamomile for sleep, the wider medical world was beginning to experiment in ways that monks, bound by tradition and a more conservative ethos, generally did not. You might hear whispers of these new, frightening procedures, perhaps even offered by a secular practitioner down the road, and wonder about their true efficacy. The decline was also influenced by economic changes. Some monasteries faced financial difficulties over time, perhaps due to wars, changes in land ownership, or decreasing endowments. This could impact their ability to maintain large herb gardens, stock extensive apothecaries, or support numerous infirmarians and their assistants without the necessary resources. While a later development delivered a final blow to the monastic monopoly on knowledge, suddenly, texts that monks had painstakingly copied by hand for centuries could be reproduced rapidly and relatively cheaply. This democratized knowledge, making medical treatises, including those ancient herbals, accessible to a much wider audience beyond the monastery walls. While monks still copied manuscripts for a time, their exclusive role as knowledge preservers gradually eroded. This meant that the very secret recipes for soothing herbal teas, once confined to their copied volumes, could now potentially reach anyone with access to a printed book. Think about the feeling of witnessing these changes. For you, the infirmarian, it wouldn't have been a dramatic revolution. It would have been a slow, almost imperceptible shift. Perhaps fewer patients arriving at the gates, more discussions about treatments from secular doctors, a growing sense that the cutting edge of medicine was moving elsewhere, outside your quiet cloister. It's a bit like watching a slow sunset. Reformation in the 16th century delivered an even more direct blow. In many parts of Northern Europe, monasteries were dissolved, their lands confiscated, and their communities dispersed. This meant the abrupt end of centuries of monastic medical practice in those regions. Their herb gardens fell into disrepair, their infirmaries closed, and their accumulated knowledge was either lost or scattered. While some medical books survived, the living tradition of care was often shattered. However, it's crucial to stress, in Catholic countries and in some regions, monasteries continued to play a role in local healthcare for centuries, especially in rural areas where secular medical services remained scarce. Their herb gardens continued to grow, and their infirmarians continued to brew soothing herbal teas for the sick. The knowledge of these natural remedies, passed down through generations, remained valuable even as new medical theories emerged. Mainstream historians still argue about the precise timeline and completeness of this decline, while monastic medicine and basic hygiene were eventually integrated into broader medical practices, even if their theoretical frameworks were discarded. The knowledge, though its primary custodians changed, continued to flow. So, as we reflect on this changing landscape, remember that the quiet, dedicated work of the monastic infirmarian didn't simply cease. It gradually became part of a larger, more diverse medical tapestry. The scent of chamomile and valerian might have lingered less exclusively within monastic walls, but the understanding of their gentle powers, so patiently cultivated, continued to serve those in need. It's a testament to the enduring nature of useful knowledge, even when its original guardians step back from the forefront. The slow, methodical pace of monastic healing may have given way to more dynamic medical advancements, but its foundational contributions quietly endured, shaping the very landscape of care for centuries to come. As the sun begins its slow descent, painting the distant western sky with hues of orange and purple, we arrive at the culmination of our journey through the quiet world of medieval monastic healing. While the landscape of medicine shifted dramatically over centuries, the legacy of quiet care left by these monks and their secret recipes for soothing herbal teas is surprisingly enduring. It wasn't a legacy of grand scientific breakthroughs or dramatic surgical feats, but rather one built on compassion, meticulous observation, and the profound power of nature's gentle remedies. Imagine looking back across the centuries at the simple herb garden you, as the infirmarian so diligently tended. The plants you cultivated, the chamomile, the valerian, the lemon balm, the mint are still recognized today for their calming and healing properties. Modern herbalists and even pharmaceutical companies still draw upon the knowledge of these very same plants for similar purposes. It's a testament to the empirical observation of those monks who, without microscopes or chemical analysis, intuitively understood the beneficial effects of these botanical allies. Their work laid a foundational layer for much of what we now call complementary and alternative medicine. One mainstream historical fact is that many of the medicinal plants widely used in the Middle Ages and carefully cultivated in monastic gardens continue to be popular herbal remedies today. Think of the widespread use of chamomile tea for relaxation and sleep, peppermint for digestive issues, or lavender for anxiety. This direct continuity highlights the practical efficacy of their knowledge, passed down through generations, often initially by word of mouth and later by those painstakingly copied herbals. The monastic commitment to documentation also forms a crucial part of their legacy. While their understanding of disease might have been limited by the science of their time, their meticulous record-keeping, particularly in the scriptorium, ensured that a vast body of botanical and medicinal knowledge survived. Those beautifully illustrated herbals, which you copied under flickering candlelight, are invaluable historical documents, providing insights into medieval plant knowledge, remedies, and even theories of health. Without these, much of that practical wisdom might have been lost to us entirely. A quirky tidbit: even today, some traditional monastic orders, particularly in Europe, maintain their ancient herb gardens and continue to produce herbal remedies often following recipes and methods that have changed very little over centuries. You can sometimes visit these places and even purchase teas or balms made by monks or nuns following these ancient traditions. It's like stepping into a living history museum, where the very sense and practices of the medieval infirmary are still alive and well, quietly continuing their gentle mission. Historians still debate the extent to which these modern monastic remedies truly reflect precise medieval formulations. But the spirit of continuity is undeniable. The monastic emphasis on holistic care is another powerful part of their legacy. They understood that healing wasn't just about treating a physical symptom. It was about addressing the whole person, body, mind, and spirit. This approach, which integrated physical remedies, spiritual solace, rest, and nourishing food, predates modern holistic health movements by centuries. When you offered a patient a warm cup of valerian tea, it was accompanied by a comforting presence, quiet prayer, and the reassuring rhythm of monastery life. This comprehensive care model, though rudimentary, provided immense comfort and often facilitated recovery in ways that purely physical interventions could not have. Consider the notion of charity and compassion. In a world often marked by brutality and indifference to suffering, monasteries stood out as places where care for the sick and the poor was a fundamental duty. The infirmarian's work, quietly tending to sick brothers, weary pilgrims, and ailing villagers, was an embodiment of this compassion. This unwavering commitment to service, regardless of status or wealth, set a powerful precedent for later forms of charitable healthcare. It's a gentle reminder that some of the most profound acts of kindness are performed in quiet, unassuming ways. The value placed on cleanliness and order within monastic communities, though not sterile by modern standards, contributed significantly to healthier living environments than often found elsewhere in medieval society. Access to clean water, often from their own wells or managed springs, dedicated washrooms, and the general discipline of monastic life reduced the spread of disease within their walls. This practical hygiene, often overlooked, indirectly supported the work of the infirmary and contributed to the monks' overall health. It was a foundational, if unglamorous, aspect of their lasting impact. Historians still argue about the precise extent of the scientific contributions of monastic medicine. While they preserved ancient texts and observed plant properties, true experimental science, as we understand it today, was rare. Their strength lay more in preservation, application, and compassionate care rather than groundbreaking research. Yet, without their tireless efforts in copying manuscripts and tending to the sick, the thread of medical knowledge might have been broken, leaving later generations with far less to build upon. They were the bridge, quietly spanning the gap between antiquity and the dawn of modern science. As the centuries marched on and formal medical schools rose to prominence, monastic medicine didn't disappear entirely. Instead, its essence, particularly the deep knowledge of herbal remedies, diffused into folk medicine, into the practices of secular apothecaries, and eventually into modern pharmacology. Many contemporary drugs have their origins in plants that were once cultivated in monastic gardens and used in their infirmaries. The humble monk, carefully brewing a soothing herbal tea for a restless patient, was, in a very real sense, contributing to a tradition that would eventually give us aspirin, digitalis, and countless other plant-derived medicines. So, as you slowly drift into slumber, consider the quiet legacy of these medieval monks. Their lives, often overlooked in the grand narratives of kings and battles, were filled with acts of profound care and dedication. They nurtured healing plants, painstakingly copied ancient wisdom, and offered solace and comfort in a world desperately in need of it. Each cup of chamomile for a sleepless night, each valerian decoction for an anxious mind was more than just a remedy. It was a promise of peace, a whisper of hope, carried on the steam of fragrant herbs. Their quiet contributions, so seamlessly woven into the fabric of daily life, continue to resonate, reminding us of the enduring power of gentle care, natural remedies, and the profound peace that comes from a well-tended life. Now, as the last light fades, imagine yourself resting deeply, your mind calm, your body at ease. Just as those medieval monks hoped for their weary patience, let the gentle hum of history lull you into a peaceful, dreamless sleep.